Mr. Picard,
Here.
Mr. Temperley,
Here.
Ms. Curler,
Here.
Mr. Polachek, Mr. Beagle,
Here.
Ms. Schmager.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, up next will be the minutes of January 10th, 2023. I'll entertain a motion to approve them.
I move approval for the minutes of January 10th, 2023.
I'll second it.
Any amendments? Looks okay. All right, Misty, another roll call vote, please.
Mr. Temperley,
Aye.
Ms. Curler,
Aye.
Mr. Beagle,
Aye.
Ms. Schmager,
Aye.
Mr. Picard.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
All right, up next is questions and public comment. I assume everyone's signed in, so.
Patrick Doyle, 325 East Washington Street, Lake Mills. Members of the Public Works Board, thank you for listening. I'm here to talk about bike lanes on Lake Street. I'm finding that discussions are taking place at the Planning Commission level and at the Public Works Board. To stay current, I met with Mr. Daly. He checked into it and forwarded several documents. One is a bicycle plan from 2005 done by Strand. This plan explores bicycle lanes from Madison Street east on Lake Street and removal of all street parking on Lake. However, the same report also suggests that street parking does force traffic to slow down. We are requesting that you do not support the removal of street parking on Lake Street. A viable bike route already exists 1 block south on Water. Removal of parking on Lake Street would increase the speed on this route, which is already a safety concern and a designated truck route. And removal of street parking would significantly impact our business and possibly shut it down. When this plan was developed in 2005, Doyle's Dogs did not exist. Using street parking for our business was discussed with the city manager at the time we started our business. We have taken a blighted corner, turned it into a thriving destination for the community and the surrounding area. We employ up to 18 students every summer, return thousands of dollars back to the community every year. We are asking for your support to allow us to continue to do so. At Doyle's Dogs, we have 4 bike racks that are routinely full. Bicyclists are finding us, which tells me people find their way, whatever that may be. We do not feel the need to try, or why do we need to feel to try and control that behavior? I've been told by numerous city officials that just because something is in the comprehensive plan, it doesn't mean it's going to happen. My question is why those plans are included in the document in the first place. When these documents are put together, there is some community feeling these discussions are led and influenced by consultants hired by the city rather than just directing the city through the process and listening to the community. If we are discussing plans that may not happen and then including them in a final document, it appears we are also paying for that to be done. Thank you for your time.
All right, thanks. Who's next?
Good evening. I'm Patricia Cicero. I live at 517 College Street, and I wanted to give a couple comments about the city's plans on reconstructing College Street. So I'm happy that it's going to be reconstructed. It definitely needs some work. I'm glad that it's not going to be widened because I don't think that is needed. I know that there is plans to have an actual stormwater system there. Right now, it's just over the road flowage. So I think that'll be an improvement. But I'm here to request that something be done as much as possible to filter out pollutants before they go into the lake, because that's where the discharge is going. Many of you probably know that Rock Lake is a very high-quality lake in our area, and we want to keep it that way. The more pollutants that get in there is going to negatively impact the lake. And for every reduction in water clarity in the lake, you will see a reduction in property values around the lake as well. That's research that has been done several places throughout the country that shows that. I also want to just comment, I know that there's been some discussion already about sidewalks, and there's an area west of the church that does not have sidewalk down to the, is it Lakeshore Drive? I always forget the name of that road. So I know that there's some people who have expressed that there's not a need for it. I agree with that. I mean, it's not a high trafficked area. We have a dog and we walk our dog a lot, so we're always walking in that area. I don't see that there's a need for that additional impervious surface, and that impervious surface will thus mean more runoff to the lake, which again, it would be good to protect the lake as much as possible. So thanks so much for your work.
Hey, Misty, Greg just showed up. If you want to add him to the roll call.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Apologize.
That's fine.
Good evening, Tom Dahnert, 234 Lakeshore Drive. You know, I've just started to get involved in paying attention to what's going on in the city here, and the common theme I continue to hear is these documents from 2005, and it's like a nightmare. I don't understand how consultants from out of town have directed the path of this community in such an adverse way. You know, I feel the staff are lost in the bureaucracy of a plan that was set in place a long time ago that does not fit this project or neighborhood, and it was designed by an out-of-town firm. These boards and councils are filled with residents. These issues are exactly why residents have an opportunity to provide input. Otherwise, we're at the mercy of staff running as a dictatorship. There's no evidence suggesting a sidewalk is needed. There's no cow path marking an area where people would naturally walk. There's no growth in residents or traffic. No one's requesting it, which is the blatantly obvious issue. And there's plenty of topography issues with my property. The addition of this sidewalk isn't going to be a safe one. It's not my plan or intention to stop the project, and I understand it's been budgeted for and approved. However, this is the time to gather the input and adjust as necessary to the residents' wishes. The sidewalk will not be safe. The topography and structural layout of this property are unique. And again, no one's asking for this to be done. I hope that common sense prevails and the plan is approved with removal of the sidewalk along the south side of College and the property is left as is. Anecdotally, I spoke with our contractor that did the addition to our property 2 years ago, and he said, you know, Tom, I have a hard time doing business in Lake Mills and don't think I'll come back because of the ordinances and restrictive covenants that are in place. And I think that's a real issue for the community. It's an unknown tax that they'll come and do work here, but they're going to build in an enormous amount of additional cost to the residents to deal with the driveway plans and sidewalk ordinances and all these things that really don't fit in our community, especially in the historical neighborhoods. Thank you.
All right.
Good evening. Thank you for the chance to public comment. My name's Anita Martin. We live at 261 Pinnacle Drive in the city of Lake Mills. Last month, I had the opportunity to listen to Susan Chire with Rock Lake Improvement Association speak on different ideas for stormwater management practices, which have been successfully used in a number of areas, including in Wisconsin. It's my understanding she'll be doing a presentation today on green infrastructure and sharing additional information. I'm certainly not an expert on stormwater management. However, I think it's important for our city to move away from gray stormwater infrastructure to a green infrastructure approach to treat water at its source. I'm asking you, the Public Works Board, to please consider the pilot program, for College Street, which is being proposed tonight. Also, as the Sandy Beach redesign goes forward, this is a great opportunity for us to showcase some of the stormwater practices that members of the public could potentially implement, such as the rain gardens, infiltration, and pervious pathways and patios. Those could be part of the Sandy Beach design and could be an opportunity for people to learn more and potentially ask questions and think about whether that would work for their particular properties. Thank you for your consideration.
I apologize, I stole public property, I'll return it.
Mike Niesman, 113 South Ferry Drive. First, thank you all for your service and the hours you put in here. My comments are respectfully made. I understand and agree with the logic and economics of doing all necessary renovating when doing street repairs, and certainly College needs that work. But in this case, I too am unaware of anyone who has spoken in favor of the sidewalk on the south side of College, and would note there's already a sidewalk on the north side, which gives access to Lakeshore Drive and the public pier there. I share Mr. Dahner's concerns regarding this part of the project. Doing so will disturb the integrity of an established historic neighborhood, will lose mature trees, and again, increase the impermeable surfaces and concomitant increase runoff into the lake. And I'm really looking forward to Susan's presentation. I think that's it's a key thing, that lake is the soul of the city, and we've kind of ignored it and allowed it to drift for a while. And I point out that I think it's Mud Lake that's already impaired, right? So it's coming our way. Safety issues here, the parishioners, many of whom are elderly, I'm willing to bet are not going to walk down that proposed sidewalk, cross the street, and walk back up. They're going to go across on that existing crosswalk. And I would make a plea now, great thing to do would be put one of those push-button yellow flasher things. They're great, and that's an accident waiting to happen, I think, these folks going across there. Not going into church. Everybody's speed's going out of church, so that's when you want those. So what this all boils down to me, is a kind of a sidewalk to nowhere that no one is specifically in favor of, and that has all the enumerated issues above that will disturb a historic neighborhood, cost us trees, and increase runoff into the lake. And all this is apparently, as I can tell, and maybe I'm wrong here, because of an outdated general plan which recommends sidewalks on both sides of every street, apparently, which is interesting because I think that South Lakeview had a sidewalk removed 3-4 years ago. Anyway, I don't think this plan was written on stone tablets and carried down the mountain by a guy in robes, so I would earnestly request that you folks recommend to the city carry on with the College Street project, but there really is no reason to spend the money on extending that sidewalk, and with EMS issues, we need the money elsewhere. So thanks again for your service.
All right, anybody else? All right, anybody online?
Yeah, I'd like to chime in if I could. Steve Dahner, 234 Lakeshore Drive. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you, Todd. I don't know if now's the right time to talk about, I had an opportunity to review the memo that was prepared by staff regarding this sidewalk issue on College Street. Is it appropriate to discuss that at this point, or is there open discussion during that conversation?
We would
Or
have to wait till
agenda
the agenda item comes up. I think Tom is prepared to address that. Would that be okay?
Excellent.
Right.
That's fine with me. If I need to chime in at that time, I will. I just didn't know if you allowed public comment once you got to that agenda item.
Mm-hmm. Is that okay to the rest of the board to allow Tom to be part of the agenda to go over?
I mean, if we have questions for him
Yeah,
at that
yeah,
time, I
yeah.
guess we can.
So we'll do that, Steve. So,
All right. Thank you, Todd.
okay. Anybody else online?
I'm Audrey Compier of 304 Lakeshore Drive. My sidewalk is on that north side of College. And I just wanted to add my voice that I don't see any need for a sidewalk on the other side of the street, that the environmental problems have already been mentioned. The safety problems have already been mentioned. There's also no parking on that side of the street, so it's not like people get out of their cars and need to go to a sidewalk. And it does seem that there are better ways the city could use their money. Thank you so much for your service and my opportunity to comment.
All right. Thank you. Anybody else online? All right. I guess that's the end of public comment. We'll go on to agenda item number 5, the director's report.
All right, good evening. We'll start again with staffing. It's an issue that, as I mentioned, I don't know how many meetings in a row now, we are making some headway. We've got some interviews scheduled for this week to fill positions in the electric utility and the wastewater utility, but then we had one come open in the water utility. So we're still not back to staffing levels from like 2 years ago yet, but we're working on it. We haven't gotten the big number of applications that we did with the last position, but hey, we're plugging through. Second thing is the outstanding performance of a wastewater treatment operator. That's Bill Kiesling, and this is an award that's being presented to him by the Department of Natural Resources. And it's just what it says. It's an award for someone that has operated the plant efficiently, effectively, and if you know anything about people that operate wastewater plants, you know that he does it very personally too. Basically what this means is that he's dang good at what he's doing, and he's got a really good staff working with him. They are or have been short one staff for at least 1.5 years now. They've dealt with a number of issues regarding the strength of the influent that they've been getting. But they have done very well in operating the plant, and so kudos to Bill and his staff for doing that. I would also mention that as we're looking at options for a new plant, you can be assured that when that occurs, you're going to have staff that will take care of that just as well as they take care of the one we've got now. I think we've mentioned on a number of occasions that the current plant has exceeded its life, and that's because we've got good people operating them. So I just wanted to, again, give kudos to Bill and the staff.
Mr. Hermanson, just
Yes.
a question. Is that an annual award that's given to one operator, and so Bill was selected this year, or what, just a little more on the award itself?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay.
In fact, there's a meeting Thursday, and I believe that's where he'll officially get the award. Yes, it is a one city, once a year award.
In the whole state, so that's
Yes,
a wonderful recognition for him.
Yes. Anything else on that one? All right, just a quick update on the ATV, UTV issue. Everything is ready to go except with the information we need from the state. And I think I mentioned that the application is in. To my understanding, it's approved, but it's working its way through their system. And as soon as we get notice, I know that everybody is ready to start using their ATVs. So we're just waiting on the state right now.
They already have.
Yes, they have. But I'm not saying that out loud.
Yeah.
Yes, they have. Next thing I did hand out to you, back up. Usually this time of the year, we have a representative from WPPI come in and do a little presentation. They typically like to do the in-person presentations every other year. So what they sent out this year was simply a list of all the services that they provide to the cities. And I should let folks in the audience know that WPPI is our energy supplier, our electricity supplier. And they do more than provide us with electricity. They also provide a number of support services. So I just wanted to give you that list of services. It shows every one that they offer. It shows the ones that we participate in, how many other communities participate. I will tell you that's a 2022 snapshot, so there are programs that we go in and out of based on need and that sort of thing. But that's kind of our WPPI report for last year.
So,
Go ahead.
So the total usage is the total number of municipalities or entities using that service?
Correct.
And using is whether Lake Mills is or is not, correct?
The X's indicate if we're using it or not, yes.
Thank you.
You know, it's obviously one in Michigan we don't use, but anyway. Any other questions on that? I have got two more very quick announcements, if you will. You'll notice that we have not set up a date for our next wastewater treatment plant discussion. We are going to do that hopefully next month. Basically, we got a note from the DNR saying that they are looking at effluent levels, possibly effluent changes to the Rock River. And so we're waiting until we get a little more information from them to see what kind of an effect it will have on us. So as information becomes available, we'll let you know and let you know when we're going to crank up those discussions again. And then the last thing, on June 21st, I will retire. Thank you.
Oh.
Have you hired your replacement yet?
Not yet, no.
Congratulations, Paul.
Yeah.
Thank you for all your years. How many years will that be then with the city?
It'll be just over 16.
16.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions or comments for the director's report? All right, we'll move on to agenda item number 6, presentation from the Rock Lake Improvement Association on Stormwater Management Technology. Susan's going to, is there you want to display the PowerPoint?
I think Dave
is doing that?
they've been working together to get it set up, right?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
He's going to do it, I think. Yep, and thank you. Next slide. So my name is Susan Trier, and thank you for having me again to give you an update on a project that we're interested in. So Rock Lake Improvement Association was founded in 1971, and it's a nonprofit, all-volunteer, membership-driven organization that's dedicated to preserving and protecting Rock Lake. A new board member summed it up nicely. Next slide. We speak for the lake since it doesn't have a voice. And next slide. The purpose of this presentation is to give you an update on what a municipality is doing in stormwater management in an older urban neighborhood. This project, outlined here in purple, next slide, targets the Lake Wingra watershed, and it equals about 7% of the urbanized portion of that watershed. So you can see some of the streets there. Next slide. This project was funded by Madison Street and Stormwater operational budgets. It's sought to study how to move from a gray stormwater infrastructure, which is what Lake Mills does as well, into a green approach, which tries to treat the water at its source. It was a two-pronged program, systems implemented by the city during street reconstructions in the right-of-way, and then systems implemented by residents in private property. Next slide. The practices that the city evaluated within that right-of-way area included rock cribs, pervious surfaces, and pervious means that water can flow through, just for those listening on Zoom and here, can flow through the object and into the ground versus sliding across the top of the surface, which is called impervious surfaces. They looked at a variety of projects, and then you can see up here, this is the rain terrace basin, and then a rain garden down here, and we'll spend a little bit of time just going through each of those projects so that you feel comfortable with them. So, next slide. This is the rain gardens. So here is a rain garden in use. This is early spring, you can see, and you can see the water is coming in from the street and flooding that particular terrace. So Madison started with what's called a curb inlet and a pipe. And then they moved into a 2-inch flow line depression in the curb, which is this approach. And they found that the one that they liked the most is this one. It's a 2-foot flume with riprap on the bottom. And this riprap and this structure allows the homeowner to help keep that entrance open. The typical rain garden is about 120 square feet, about 15 by 8. The city plans a preparation of about 30 minutes to do the soil. There's 2 feet of engineered soil, which is 70% sand, 30% compost, and then 6 inches of planting mix of pulverized topsoil, sand, and compost. Gardens were put in with some shade options, and they found that Norway maple shade was extremely difficult to work with. Residents did pay to move into this design. They paid $100 to participate, and then they received a $5 rebate on their stormwater utility bill for every month that they stayed with the garden being active. The city paid an average here, and the parentheses gives you an idea of their bids. So they got bids as low as $2,100 and as much as $4,800. Interestingly, they went with the $4,800 bids. Let's change slides. So for successes, interestingly enough, they really needed to do a hand-poured entrance flume. That was very important, and any gardener will tell you well-prepared soil was absolutely critical to the success of it. They were actually very surprised at how nasty the soil was in their terraces. Very difficult to grow things. Next slide. For concerns, some of it slept on aesthetics. And then there was fears of change, safety, property values. The city helped diffuse concerns on aesthetics by getting residents to give some input into their garden design. The city garden designers avoided very tall perennials. They went actually taller than I would have expected, and they did shorter entrances by the curb. So it's interesting, so they saw the view of these gardens from street side. I think it would be very interesting for Lake Mills to consider a wedge solution, because we have a lot of walkers, and this is a very urban area, and where you'd be looking at, people are going to look at it from the sidewalk. So we could have shorter in the sidewalk, shorter on the street side, a little bit taller in the middle, or you could look at all shorter vegetation as well. The other thing the city did was they had a public meeting to introduce this pilot program, and they contacted homeowners via mailings. They said that if they would have done it again, they would have partnered with more organizations like the Friends of Lake Wingra, which is kind of similar to the Rock Lake Improvement Association, and encouraged private contact with homeowners so that you could also talk about the private property options and encourage and try to develop a little bit more of a community talk amongst each other to promote it. Next slide. Rain basins. The important thing here with rain basins is there is no cut on the side, from the street into the unit. And the way they had this designed was the city improved that terrace area, and then the resident could choose whether they wanted to put turf in or whether they wanted to put native plantings in. And there was no cost to the resident to do that. And next slide. The city basically said they'd never do this one again. It just turned into a very expensive hole with very little impact. So they would not recommend us looking at that at all. Next slide. Here, pervious surfaces. Okay, so here is concrete, pervious surface, regular road, and then here, this is obvious that that's a paved drain. So Madison has significant experience with details associated with pervious surfaces, including snow removal impact, leaves, frost heave, the substances used in edges, and that would be the edges between these paved drains, and then edges also between road and these panels. How to maintain it, whether it's sweeping or vacuuming. At this point, they're leaning towards that paved drain product, and interestingly, the residents like it. They think it's very classy and it upgrades the residents, the neighborhood quite a bit. As Lake Mills moves towards looking at these projects, a conference call would be offered, as well as plans and specs and everything that they've learned on how to manage these sidewalks and also streets would be shared with the city. Next slide. And then the last option that we talked about was a rock crib. And so in this case, what happens is rain comes down this driveway and hits these panels of pervious sidewalk. The way they did it now was they then took the rainwater and moved it to the terrace underground and into a rock crib. They would change that methodology and put the rock crib directly underneath the sidewalk because the EPA, a certain EPA ruling not to move the stormwater. So that's what they would do. The city picked the locations to implement this. This was no cost to the homeowner. They would definitely keep using rock cribs. They felt that they were effective. This area does better if the homeowner does some sort of maintenance, because what happens is the holes in the pervious concrete start to get filled up. So you either have to sweep or vacuum. That is part of the difficulty associated with this technology. It wasn't required of the homeowner, but it would be better if they would do that. Here you see quite a difference in costs. And then the difference here is if it was attached to an pervious surface, then they wouldn't go through the expense of going ahead and attaching to a storm drain. And if it went to a normal street, then it was the more expensive option because they went ahead and put it into a storm drain. Next slide. So remember, Madison did that at city expense, but then they were also encouraging homeowners to do stuff on their private property. For city reimbursement, all projects required residents to get pre-approval, have deed restrictions, comply with codes, submit financial documentation, which you'd imagine would be required. For rain gardens, they found that residents were afraid of making mistakes, and they had difficulty finding contractors. They did get discounted natives from the city. Cost-wise, do-it-yourself ran between $300 and $1,000 for plants and labor. If residents used contractors, they ran between $1,200 and $2,400. Gardens needed a minimum of 600 square feet of impervious surfaces as part of a contributing area to qualify. So what that meant was, the runoff from the roof, Mary, going down into that garden would have to be about 600 square feet. The other thing that they recommended, which I found fascinating, is this option right here. Many of us have heard about disconnecting the storm drain, the runoff, the downspout. But what they found research that was done that if you improved the ground 5 feet by 5 feet under your downspout, that your ability to infiltrate increased 46 to 64%. And then the homeowner was allowed to put back turf, or they could put in a couple plants. This was called Rain Garden Light. Extremely effective for the city, and they want to definitely encourage people to do Rain Garden Light. Really, all it was working the ground underneath their downspout and then encouraging that downspout not to just drain off their property, okay? And then the other option was rain barrels. The city reimbursed up to $250 for a minimum of 150 square foot roof draining into it. That volume may require a resident to daisy chain. And then they had some other very ambitious options of green roofs, infiltration trenches, some pervious pavement for patios and things like that. Next slide. So, how could Lake Mills fund a pilot? Madison funded this pilot through streets and stormwater funding. One option from Lake Mills is to apply for the DNR UNPS and SW grant, the Urban Non-Point Source and Stormwater Planning Grant. The City of Lake Mills used this grant to fund their 2007 Stormwater Utility Feasibility Study. Since then, the city hasn't applied for this DNR grant, and in recent years, these grants have tended to go to municipalities with an MS4 permit. However, the DNR is recognizing the importance of higher quality lakes, and Rock Lake is valued and a well-studied lake in our area, so they have encouraged us to apply. Applications are being accepted, and if we went this route, you have to get moving because your application would be due April 14th for this year. Okay. Next slide. Another possibility would be to look at water quality trading, and this ties in with the wastewater treatment facility. In water quality trading, practices to reduce phosphorus from entering the watershed are modeled, and credits are given, which in the end determines how much phosphorus your wastewater facility can discharge. In 2019, Lake Mills looked in this option, but only from receiving the full credit amount through Rock Creek practices such as crop conversions. Paul Hermanson indicated to me that the city didn't have any partners to work with at the time. It is possible to get some amount of credits through this lake-oriented pilot project to meet your compliance schedule by 2026. According to a conversation I had with a specialist in the DNR, credit amounts tend to be lower if the practice centers on the lake rather than a river. And that was one of the reasons Lake Mills was looking predominantly at Rock Creek. This is because the DNR might need to account for impoundment of phosphorus in the lake. However, this determination is site-specific and may not apply in every trading solution. I was assured that there was flexibility in this determination. And so the DNR did encourage taking a look at this option to get some type of credit by going towards the lake. Next slide. Another possibility would be to establish a stormwater utility. With this approach, the cost of maintaining and improving stormwater management is more equitably spread out so that properties with a greater amount of impervious surfaces pay more. Lake Mills came close to enacting this approach back in 2007. Now may be a very good time to revisit this option again. The city of Jefferson implemented a stormwater utility in 2008 with around 7,900 residents. Since then, they've lost 2.5% of their population. The city of Lake Mills, on the other hand, has gained population by 15.4% during the same period. We're at about 6,361 residents. Other municipalities, such as Fort Atkinson and Watertown, also have stormwater utilities. This grant that we mentioned up above could also be used to help push us into a stormwater utility. Based on a webinar that I saw today, you could use the results of your 2007 study, which gave a lot of detail on how you would fund it. You would need support from City Council, some past resolution, and then those two combined would be a very powerful resource in order to apply for a grant to tie up the other loose ends of how you would model and implement this within the city. Next slide. So, our recommendations. We think that you should design and implement a green infrastructure project pilot with both a right-of-way, Dave, next slide. Yeah, thanks. With a right-of-way and the private property aspects. And as Anita said in her public comment, we think that the redesign at Sandy Beach will just be an excellent opportunity for people to be able to go and see how they can manage their own stormwater on their property. You can have infiltration, you could have pervious surfaces, you could have a rain garden, you could have natural shoreline. all those could be modeled and documented for citizens to be able to see and imagine what it would look like on their property. Next, we recommend looking for funding, and through this whole process, leveraging community partnerships. Next slide. And lastly, we think that given the volume of water moving down College Street, the city should test framed inlet technology. So next slide. And just to clarify that last recommendation, this is what a framed inlet device looks like. There would be two right where College Street meets Lakeshore Drive. Madison prefers the stainless steel frame because it's much more durable and it lasts a lot longer. Bags would need to be replaced every 2 to 3 years. They suggested contacting the firm and seeing if they would give us a trial or even a nonprofit pricing for a pilot to see whether this technology would work for us. We, RLIA, would be very interested in helping facilitate this. And given all this conversation about the additional sidewalk funding, maybe that funding could be redirected into 2 framed inlets on that street to help absorb some of that runoff that's coming in and not put in more impervious surfaces. Next. And so, thank you so much for your attention, and we would love to help and work with you on this project. Are there any questions?
I've got a comment about the stormwater utility. Are you familiar with the state levy limits?
I am not familiar with the current state levy limits. I know that it was done, and the data I looked at was 2007, Todd.
It's 0%, plus they changed it in 2013, where if we add new fees, we have to deduct that from the tax levy. So if we spend thousands to establish a stormwater utility, which raises 100,000, they come back and say, now you have to knock off 100,000. It's a net gain now.
You would have to go to referendum.
We have to go to referendum.
To take it off the levy.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you have to reduce your levy by the amount you raise.
Yeah.
But what would be interesting and good about it too, though, is according to the 2007 study, they said that all our stormwater management comes from property taxes, which makes sense. That was saying that residents were paying 77%, private residents were paying 77% of the costs associated with managing stormwater, where their properties were only contributing 40% of the stormwater runoff. So by moving into perhaps a stormwater utility and maybe getting funding to help kind of flesh that out, what do you need to do, we would be able to have greater input, financial input from other organizations beyond private homeowners.
Yeah, I think.
It'd be winners and losers.
Yeah, I think potentially what's being referenced is if you have a stormwater utility and it's been approved and can come off the levy, non-tax-paying entities are then contributing.
Encourage them to take on more activities to control it as well, right? Because they don't necessarily want to be paying for it.
But in the end, though, are we really generating more revenue? We're just shifting revenue. If the state tax levy limits say, well, if you're going to raise this much, you got to.
You may, that's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
I'd probably need more time to flesh that out, but you certainly would be spreading the cost out among more payers, I guess.
And more equitably.
But before 2013, it was seen as a way to generate more revenue.
In order to ensure it didn't affect the levy, so affect other operations in the city, a referendum to take it off of the levy would be necessary. Otherwise, you would you'd be raising revenue here and reducing it here.
Yeah.
So in order to have it not affect what you can levy for, you would need to go to the city would need to go to referendum.
Right. All right. So it's not quite as simple as it used to be before.
Correct.
2013.
And I think there was in the mid 2000s a lot of interest in developing these because there was an indication that this change was coming, and so you did see stormwater utilities created in that time period to get ahead of it. We're past that point now. So similar to communities that didn't have a garbage fee, Now, if
Yeah,
they
we
create-
talked about that,
Now,
yeah.
if they create one, they have to go to referendum to take it off of the levy.
Mhm.
It's a similar process.
All right, okay.
Thank you.
Oh, Lisa has questions.
Sorry.
I wasn't clear on the information that you shared from Madison's experience. Was that a pilot project?
I don't think your mic is on, Lisa.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was the information that you've been sharing from Madison's experience, was that a pilot project, and about what year did that occur?
We're still within the 5-year analysis period, so it was like 3 years ago, I think, like right before COVID.
Okay, so they're just kind of getting started on it.
And
then-
they're very positive about it. So they have, Phil Gabler, he's the one who's in charge of the project, said that they were going to roll it out and expand it, and, you know. The only thing they weren't happy with was the rain basins. And they weren't happy with, they need to reach out to individuals, private property, better. They think they need to do a better job of that.
And so when they embarked on this, did they have some targets or metrics or goals that they were trying to accomplish in terms of the amount of pollutants that were reduced? So are they doing some evaluation on how
Right.
it's reduced volume of stormwater pollutants or anything
Right.
like that?
I didn't bring all that in because I was trying to keep this shorter. But yeah, I could do like Rideau 2 or whatever and talk about the results of what they've done, because I really didn't go through that with Phil.
And that's okay.
Yep.
No, I just wanted
And
to
like how they were
understand.
measuring it, but they
So
are.
they had a design, or they had some goals in
Yes.
mind of what they were trying to
Right.
accomplish with
Particularly
these different practices.
for Lake Wingra. Mhm.
Okay.
They did.
And then I guess one other, I don't know if it's a question or comment, but I wondered about, some of the projects for private property owners, I would think would be very case by case, whether a property owner would be, sort of agreeable, or
Oh, absolutely.
where does that infiltrated water go? They're not going to want it too close to their foundation, other things like that. So I would assume that that would be part of the process, is staff working with property owners to, understand their individual concerns.
Right, and very much so. And so, if you remember, there's a big issue associated when you go ahead to it. I mean, you've got to do, have to get all pre-approved, you have to work with the city in designing your system, you have to get it audited, make sure it's there, you have to give your finance documents in that you actually paid this. So, I mean, yeah, it's a case-by-case basis.
What's the rule? I thought we could only allow a simple lawn. I mean, or if someone wants to put a rain garden in the right of way, are they allowed to?
In the right of way?
Yeah.
I think what you're talking about, they may need a privilege if there's like a structure or something like that, but if it's built at grade, the city doesn't usually consider like privileges for such issues. I guess I'm not really sure. That's the first thing that comes to mind.
Right. So, but the planning commission need to be involved to modify the zoning laws to allow rain gardens, or?
If there's a conflict,
Yeah.
we'd have to research if there is. The main thing that comes with anything that's installed privately on the right of way is obviously subject to removal if the city needed to do it, or during a project needed to be in the right of way. And so there's sometimes issues if someone installed a planter or something like that. It has to come out when we're doing work in the right of way.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine if there was a system set up like this, there'd be some sort of application process in order to install this rain garden, standards that the city would have created in order to make sure that it's accomplishing the goals that the city would like to see in order to have that involvement. We'd have to do more research on if there is a conflict with the code and how that would be rectified and what a program would look like.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. In the right-of-way, the rain gardens had a particular design. The city had picked the plants. I mean, you had some ability to modify, whereas if it's up on your private property, it was totally up to you how you wanted to design it. There was just a certain requirement about how much water has to be displaced and absorbed by your rainwater. There's actually a lot of resources out there that the city could easily incorporate in studying this, both from the state and the county on the construction of rain gardens.
So the takeaway is there's lots of things to talk about: finance, planning. So,
Yeah, and that we would need to get started and working on that if you're planning this for the upcoming streets, or even putting impervious surfaces at Lakeshore Drive at each intersection of the streets coming down into it. So, yeah, we would love to keep this conversation moving along and not
all right.
dying in fits and starts. Thank you.
All right. Up next, agenda item number 7, discussion recommendation on College Street reconstruction bid package. Before we discuss, let's get an official motion to approve the proposed plans as is right now.
I'll make a motion to recommend that the city council see contractor bids on the College Street reconstruction bid package.
Is there a second?
Excuse me, a second.
All right, so we're in the discussion phase. So at this time, I want to make a motion that we amend the project to remove the proposed sidewalks from the south side from the church to Lakeshore Drive. Is there a second for that?
I'll second that.
All right, so now we have a motion to discuss removing the proposed sidewalk. So I guess Tom would like to go over his memo, his correspondence.
We need another motion there.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
What specifically with regard to your motion to amend?
Could you please turn your microphone on?
Thanks, Misty. I asked if Mr. Temperley could restate his motion to amend, just so I make sure I have it clear.
To remove the proposed new sidewalk from the church down to Lakeshore Drive.
So what you're stating is that you'd like the recommendation to the council to include removal of the
Yes.
planned sidewalk from the Catholic Church to Lakeshore Drive?
Yes.
Okay.
We just recommend things. Tom is aware of that, right, Tom? Yes. But this means a good practice for your speech.
I guess I have a question, point of order. So our board reviews plans, make sure they're consistent with city policy and practices. So we have a memo from the staff that's saying that that the city policy would require the sidewalk. So does this amendment end up saying, don't follow the policy? I guess I'm just trying to wrap my head around, procedurally, how we need to look at this.
I believe the answer to that question is yes. The recommendation would be in conflict with city council adopted policy.
The
So
amendment.
The amendment.
Okay.
Yes, if that's your question.
So we have a motion and a second. So let's talk about removing the sidewalk.
So can I ask a question about the conversation regarding the alternatives?
Oh, your mic.
Oh.
Make sure your mic's
Thank you.
on.
I thought it was on, sorry, I apologize. What other alternatives that had been discussed regarding the removal of the sidewalk, regarding the safety concerns and a cross path, given that if we remove it, I support and understand that the number of pedestrians in that space are not great, but there were some concerns regarding safety that had been mentioned in some of the public comments, and whether we have the ability, given that we had discussed at our last meeting, that the plans had been finalized, to my understanding, with the contractor, and so so it is an option, we actually can make a modification to the current plan.
What's before you tonight is the authorization to bid the project.
Okay.
Which is a solicitation of contractors to submit proposals to get the work.
So this is still an open opportunity to make this change? That's why I want to
Yes,
end it. Okay,
the word propose is in these documents.
okay.
and that there's a definition proposed, plan put forward for discussion by others.
Mr. Chairman, before we get into the board discussion about this, there was somebody online that was indicated in the earlier comments, public comments, that they wanted to say something, and you suggested that that happened now, correct?
Yeah, that's his father.
Yeah.
Tom.
So, did the person online wish to make comments?
Oh, is Steve still on?
All right, well, thank you so much for remembering that, but what I said is I would defer to listening to what the council or what your board said. And as I recall, the chair said that Tom Dahnert was going to address some of these issues, and that I would ring in afterward if I felt it was necessary. But thank you again.
Mr. Chairman, I would respectfully ask that the public make their comments before we have the discussion, and that the board vote if there is a need to have such discussion with the public during or after our discussion.
Motion to suspend the rules and to proceed.
Yes.
Okay, so is there a motion to suspend the rules and allow Tom to speak?
Tom, do you have, would you like to speak now? Or did you do enough speaking earlier?
Whenever you'd like me to speak, I will.
You know, it's your only time to address your points, right? Yeah.
So if you're asking me if I'd like to speak now, sure.
I'll make a motion to suspend the rules to allow Mr. Dahnert to speak to the board.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Well, thank you. The procedural stuff is fun, isn't it? You know, I have a hard time understanding that the guidelines that were put in place require the sidewalk. You know, it in that document, which I don't really like, a minor gap is defined as any portion of street where addition of sidewalk may be desirable, but is not necessary to provide reasonable, safe access. It's very clear. You know, and the memo is very nice, and it lays out the arguments from the city staff pretty clearly. I'm not going to refute every single one of the line items, although I could. I just would like to call out a few of them. You know, in the first one, the sidewalk would lead to one of the city's public access piers to Rock Lake, which is wrong. It actually would dead end at Lakeshore Drive, and you'd have to cross the street to then go west to get to the public access on the north side of College Street, where a sidewalk already does exist. And interestingly, my property originally owned the land with the neighboring property across College Street at the lake to the center line of College Street. And if it weren't for my grandpa acquiescing to the city to allow that College Street end access, you know, that street end access wouldn't even exist, but that's history. You know, the second point with filling a gap within a half mile of the Lake Mills Middle School, you know, I live there. Generations of my family have lived there, and our neighbors. No one's ever had an issue walking to the school. I've never seen someone walk across the lake and come up College Street to walk to the school. So that really seems irrelevant. And the issue with number 3, public gatherings at the Catechism Center at the church, you know, that's been going on since the 70s or 80s, I believe, and there's never been an issue there. Again, my grandparents donated the land for that Catechism Center to be built. If my grandpa had any idea that this would affect his property in the way that it is, I think he would have reconsidered that. You know, like I said, I can refute the other ones, but it's not worth the time.
You may note the 2005 plan doesn't even mention this, correct?
Yeah, I've brought that up previously, that College Street is not even in the 2005 plan.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I live down there on Lakeshore Drive, and I've been able and had the privilege to witness pedestrian traffic there for 39 years. And it's a unique area. You know, people don't even walk on the sidewalks that do exist. And I don't know if the city can't or won't enforce it, but it's quite interesting when I come home and people are walking 4 abreast down Lakeshore Drive and impeding traffic that should be on that road. So I have a hard time putting in a sidewalk that I'm responsible to maintain. As I'm shoveling, I'm watching people walk in the road. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. You know, and I think I provided pictures that are in the packet. I question why there never was a sidewalk here. There's got to be a reason. I don't know what it is. It predates all of us. But the network, the sidewalk network that exists has served the community just fine. You know, there's some sightings in here about pedestrian deaths, and I don't see any sightings on how many pedestrian deaths there's been in the city of Lake Mills. I also don't have any idea how many complaints there have been for accidents that may have occurred at that intersection. If you looked at those pictures, it doesn't really do it justice, but there's a significant drop-off on my property where the sidewalk is proposed that I think is quite dangerous. There's a retaining wall that's there. You know, and people in the public tend to use my property, and I'm sure others, as their public park or dog park. People are commonly up in my yard, and those perspectives concern me that someone may fall off that retaining wall and injure themselves. And, you know, I'm not interested in that being a lawsuit that I'm involved in, and I don't think the city really should be either. So I wonder if that's the reason the sidewalk never existed, is the topography.
Or
The other
carriage
thing
house. I think the carriage house is.
The other issue, I
closer
think,
up
is the
the
carriage
bay,
house
yeah.
that is original to the home that's built there. You know, it's a unique structure that probably predates any setbacks or any other rules that were in place. I'm not sure, but you know, horses might have been there. You know, so this uniqueness, just the guidebook of the city plan, comprehensive plan from 2005 doesn't really fit this unique situation. So those are the notes I have. I'm happy to answer any questions or get out of your way.
Okay, so I'm on Fremont. I've been living there for 25 years, and I walk all the time by there. And I've got 5 years of trick-or-treating and Cub Scouts at the church. And when Tom told me that they were going to put sidewalks in that piece, you want to tell the board what I told you?
You said there's already a sidewalk there.
I've been walking there for so many years, conditioned to use the other side, that we just completely ignored the other side, and I had to go home and look up on Google Earth to see, oh yeah, that's where that carriage house is at.
Well, matter of fact, Todd, the plan that exists shows that there's a sidewalk there. There's not. The plan is
Yeah.
wrong.
Right. So pretty much no one in the neighborhood is asking for
Nobody
this.
cares.
Yeah. So any more questions for Tom?
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Daner, thank you for being here and
Thank you.
giving us, expressing your concerns. And it's a beautiful family home. I had a chance to drive over in your neighborhood this afternoon just to kind of take a closer look. And there was something on the plans that we've been asked to look at that shows 2 driveways onto College Street at your property, and then one of them is labeled as it's going to be removed. And so I called the city manager because I wanted to understand. He gave us copies of when the newer driveway was put in a couple of years ago, I guess. So I guess I just wanted to just verify with you that your understanding that the one driveway would be removed and the other one, the newer one, would be retained. Is that your understanding of the
I
project?
think I understand the plan. I'm not appreciative of it. And that driveway issue is something I alluded to in my public comment, that these ordinances, or whatever you call them, just don't fit for these properties. But I did see that in the plan as well, and am not happy about that either. It's a garage that we use, and I'm not sure, there's probably some legality involved, but I'm not sure how the city can impede the use of an existing structure that's been there for 100 years.
The smaller garage.
Carriage
The
house,
smaller-
correct.
Okay. Oh, that's the
Yeah.
carriage house when you say that.
And
the
you
smaller-
may have noticed there's a car parked there.
Yeah.
I don't know how somebody's gonna walk through that car on the sidewalk, but things are advancing every day.
So I'm confused. Was there, normally one property gets one driveway. Was there, as part of this driveway and garage addition, was there an agreement that this other driveway would be removed?
Yes, the driveway permit that was submitted was approved with the understanding that the existing driveway would be removed at the time of the reconstruction. And so when that came forward, the record indicates in the permit process that it was noted a variance would have to be required in order to maintain the existing driveway. If a variance wasn't obtained, it would be removed. It would need to be removed. And then when the driveway permit was granted, it was agreed upon that since the College Street reconstruction project was upcoming, that the city would take on the expense of removing the driveway and closing it from the street. Since it's a small addition to the reconstruction project, and it would alleviate the applicant at that time of the cost of removal.
So, Mr. Dennert, were you aware of this?
No, that was with the previous owner,
The previous owner is your father-in-law,
father.
and he did not make you aware of that?
I don't think he was aware of it.
So I think, let's get some clarification here. To start with, I think the city is working with existing policy, right?
Yeah.
Everyone can acknowledge that this road reconstruction policy was designed, or this road reconstruction project was designed in light of that existing policy. This board does not have the authority to change that policy, clearly.
Right. Yep.
And make
You can
recommendations.
make this a recommendation. Yeah.
So that's kind of number one. That's why it was designed that way. There's no, animus or anything like
Right.
that whatsoever. With regard,
And that policy was created by the city council, not by some
adopted
consultant.
by, yes, adopted by the city council, certainly. The building, the structure that was created, the new garage and the driveway itself, I did grab the permit application, the building permit application packet on that, and that actually has history of the entire property through time as well. The document that was handed to the board tonight is the initial applicant's drawing of what was proposed. That showed a compliant driveway. The original permit was denied based on not having a compliant driveway. That was denied by the building inspector, that was denied by the zoning inspector, and that's when the talk about a variance being required to have a non-conforming driveway came up. We've had issues with other non-conformances
Yeah.
in driveway that have required a variance, or that process at least, to have the authority to install that. So there was contemplation of this at that time, and there was action that was taken basically in reliance on those documents, that the city changed its tact and ultimately did permit the new driveway, the new structure, with the idea of compliance in the future, specifically with this project. So I just wanted to make sure that that was generally understood. That, as the attorney for the city, that's my understanding at this point. I've reviewed the files that are involved with this. I remember hearing at least anecdotally about the conversations that had been had. So I think that's decent information with regard to the starting point right now. If you can continue, Mr. Picard.
Thank you. And I see on the construction plans, it does say remove existing driveway apron from the front of that carriage house, as we're calling it, the small garage. So that's consistent with what the city attorney said.
In the construction plans.
Yes.
Right. Mhm.
And I guess I would just further note that neither I, the Public Works Board, or the City Council can grant a variance to the zoning code. The only avenue to obtain a variance is through the zoning board of appeals.
Yeah, it's,
So we will not be discussing, this board will not be
discussing
discussing
removing the apron because,
the existence of that driveway or lack thereof. At this
I
point,
understand, I was asked.
yeah,
At this point, it's
Yeah.
going to be removed.
yeah. But the motion right now is just to remove the proposed sidewalk, and that's
I
a
just
separate
responded
issue.
to a question.
Yeah, yep, and that's a separate issue from removing the apron.
Wholly a separate issue, I agree
Yes.
with that, yes.
Yes.
So your motion to amend, that hasn't been voted on yet, was to make a recommendation to remove that portion of the sidewalk from the reconstruction of College Street.
Yes. So, any more questions on that topic? Any comments?
I'm sorry. I had just a question regarding the comment made about the way that the current pedestrian traffic goes across the street from the parking lot to the church, and that we don't have the pedestrians necessarily coming up on that absent sidewalk area. Are there, while we're making an amendment, possible amendment to the recommendation, do we need to recommend anything else under consideration to increase safety for the crosswalk? Someone had mentioned shoring that up, and so is that no sidewalk and also, or is there any other alternative? I haven't seen or read any data that would suggest we have any issues with safety, but there are larger numbers of pedestrians when there's utilization of the church. And so I'm curious.
There's no issue. I mean, there's
There are no
a
issues. So
walkway right now, yeah.
There isn't anything additional that would be a part of, needed in that area?
We
In
intend to
absence of a
install a signage that says pedestrian crossway. It's not,
Oh,
it's
okay.
not,
And I think.
it's not lit up, or blinking, but we'll install pedestrian
Okay, that's
crossway
part-
signage
okay.
at that crossway.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Daner.
Obviously, I'm gonna vote yes, because I've never been a fan of filling the gap ever since the council passed the 2005 plan. It's just too destructive. One of the first victims was a homeowner over on Franklin Street by Memorial Park. A sidewalk was placed so close to his garage, the guy had to rebuild his garage and turn it sideways because it created a safety issue that didn't exist before. There's other pedestrian issues that we should focus on. I think filling the gaps in remote side streets, we should just stop it and focus on how pedestrians can get across County V to get to their jobs to McDonald's, which seems to be ignored in the pedestrian plans. So,
That one specifically, it's a county road, I think is probably why the city hasn't.
right,
So I just want to be clear, we don't have jurisdiction over the roadway.
right.
I would also be surprised if the city caused a safety issue by requiring sidewalks as a city, as you just suggested. I would like to not let that statement just stand on its own without questioning that the city would create such a situation.
So I've got some thoughts here. First of all, I am also a member of the Arts Alliance of Greater Lake Mills. And a week ago, last Sunday, I was volunteering at the Arts Alliance Super Bowl, which St. Francis graciously hosted as our fundraiser for the food pantry. And I got to the church early, about 11. Well, actually, it was about maybe 20 to 11. And parishioners were using the parking lot, and that's where I parked. Everyone was going across the crosswalk, and there was no problem. And people were stopping. People who were in the area in vehicles were going into the parking lot. It's not a high-traffic area. People are there. They expect people to go across the crosswalk. It's not like Tyranina and Main Street, but by the Quick Trip or the Walgreens, it's not that high traffic volume type of an area. So I cannot visualize people parking in the parking lot going down to the Lakeshore Drive, crossing the walk, and then up through a new parking lot on the north side to get to the parish hall or the church. It's just not going to happen. So, you know, signage at the crosswalk could help. If it really got bad, you could easily do flashing yellow lights, and that's certainly a lot cheaper than tearing up the other side of the street. I read in the materials that existing trees impede the power lines. These power lines really should be buried like other lines in the neighborhood. I live 1 block from this proposed sidewalk, and the power lines in my backyard were buried last summer. So it's my understanding that the goal is or was that the power lines in that neighborhood are supposed to be buried or going to be buried, and that project is underway or being phased in. So the solution here would be to bury the power lines if they're impeding the trees.
Can I speak to that one real quick?
Pardon?
Can I speak to that one real quick?
Sure.
Yeah, the plan is to bury them there. That does not eliminate poles, every pole. We still have streetlight poles, we still have support poles for secondary and stuff, what's that? Service lines, the secondary lines, and we don't know what the other utilities are gonna do, the phone company and cable, but the plan is to bury those as much as possible, absolutely.
Right. So in that case, you know, maybe that's a partial solution, or take a look at that to minimize the number of power lines. So this neighborhood, it's historical, lots of trees. That's one of the reasons why my wife and I chose to live here. I think that a required sidewalk plan is better utilized in new planned developments or where traffic volume is high enough, where safety concerns are, you know, warrant them. Older historical neighborhoods I think they should be grandfathered. And then lastly, I think sidewalk issues should be done on a case-by-case basis. I don't know that they have a gap, fill in the gap just because there's a gap. If traffic safety warrants it, that would be a reason. So my preference would be to direct any sidewalk monies from the church to the Lakeshore Drive towards other infrastructure items, either an inlet idea that we've heard tonight, or perhaps other impervious solutions that were discussed as well. So those are my thoughts.
Any other thoughts?
As I mentioned earlier, I have a concern that it's really not in our wheelhouse to be making a recommendation that's contrary to a policy established by the city council. Although that may be, you know, some concern that some board members have. I was listening to Mr. Daynard speaking a number of times. He was talking about the uniqueness of his property, and I would agree that there are some unique aspects to it, specifically the location of the carriage house and the hill behind. But when I think of the word unique, that kind of tied with what Attorney Drescher was talking about a variance. It seems to me that that's where variances are appropriate, is if someone can demonstrate that there's a unique circumstance about their property where, you know, it's not feasible to meet the normal requirements. So I don't think this is really, again, I don't think that's really within our wheelhouse to be recommending a change to the construction plans that's contrary to the city policy from 2005.
What date did that council pass the policy?
Which policy?
Lisa
The
referred.
2005 plan? Is that what we're, the sidewalk plan?
The Strand sidewalk plan that I have is dated January 2005. That has been incorporated into the comprehensive plan, the transportation plan, and I believe that that is the most current version of that document, the 2005 version.
Yeah, I wasn't on the council. I raised objections, and they said, it's just a plan, it's just a proposal for future proposals.
The sidewalk plan was just a plan?
Yes.
It's not a policy. It doesn't read as a
Isn't there other city council policy regarding sidewalks during construction?
Yes, with regard, I mean, our subdivision code, for instance, on new construction, I mean, you
Yeah.
talked a lot about distinguishing that the subdivision code does require installation of sidewalks with new development. There has been precedential kind of history that establishes filling of the gaps. The council has taken overt steps to take action to fill the gaps. I think one of those is the recent TAP grant that was applied for in 2020 with the express intent to fill gaps and the maps that were shown with that document. Other neighborhood streets have been redeveloped and sidewalks have been added or altered with regard to those projects. Yes, I think there's a lot of policy on the book with regard to this specific topic. And I go back to the previous statement that city staff views this as though they have designed this project in regard within the realm of the policy that has been granted. If there's an issue with that, the city council really is the appropriate entity to change that policy. So your recommendation can be just that, but I don't want to overstep that.
Yeah, I always, it's in the Public Works Board ordinance that we recommend new sidewalks. So we're exercising our authority under the Public Works Board ordinance to recommend sidewalks or not sidewalks.
Where I think there may be a little bit of difficulty is with regard to this project, right? We're at a late stage with regard to this project. It's gone through the CIP process. It was budgeted for a number of years. Design started last year. And now it appears as though the Public Works Board is scrutinizing the project, which staff contends has been developed with regard to the policies that has been in place. And I think that's a fine line. Your recommendation, your motion itself has been heard. It has been seconded. And I think passing that information on to the council is appropriate.
If I can speak to it, I think what I don't want to get lost in the conversation is that what staff ultimately requires is clarity, ultimately from the city council, in that I am unable to instruct the city to expend resources in such a way that is contrary to city council policy. I think that would be inappropriate of me to do, and I think ultimately it's not within my, it's inappropriate for me to defy stated city council goals. And so when we proceed with designing a project, we rely on adopted policy by the city council to do that. And so when we talk about, we can implement, and I can mobilize city resources to administer any number of policies that the city council would want regarding sidewalks. And so if such an exception to the policy was granted, I would request that the city council, if it was referred to the Public Works Board, review that policy to ensure it still meets the policy objectives of the city council. And if it doesn't, that it be changed. Because when we begin designing a project, we are obligated as staff to design it to the standards that the city council has informed us to do. And in that case includes the filling of minor gaps in the sidewalk network. And so if the city council is no longer interested in filling those gaps or installing new sidewalk in existing neighborhoods, then I think that needs to be a clear policy directive from that city council. There's all manner of policy. You can remove sidewalks on streets. You can install sidewalks where there are none. You can, how you fund them is a policy. So that you can mandate them as we have in our code for new development. So there's all sorts of ways that the city council can indicate to staff how to design these projects. What I think is difficult is we don't want to go through an exercise where we get to project bidding each and every year, and we're removing things from plans because they're being designed based on policy that's no longer consistent with policy goals. Because there is a cost associated with designing these projects, and then there's a cost associated with removing things from projects that we have to. You expend resources to draw them on the paper. You expend resources to erase them from the paper. And so I think clarity is ultimately, as it's stated in the conclusion of the staff memo, is clarity is the ultimate goal that we are seeking. We believe we've designed this street to match city council policy. If that policy is no longer the will of the city council, then we would need a resolution, an amendment to the sidewalk policy or something to inform us so that we can continue to design projects, and that when they get to you for a recommendation to authorize to bid, that they conform with the expectations that have been made of us.
Can I ask, is there a written policy? You've used the word policy, and this reads as a proposal. And so is there actually a written policy by the city council regarding the expectation of sidewalks? Because I haven't read anything that has been distributed to prepare for this meeting regarding policy. This reads, the words specifically are proposes improvements.
Sorry, which
So
document are you
I'm on
looking
the
at?
2005 City of Lake Mills Sidewalk Plan, which reads as a proposal for improving gaps and mentioned,
Yeah,
noted
that was
before,
told,
college was not
right.
even noted as an area of improvement. So when we're talking about policy, I 100% support and understand the position that management's in and that we are in as a board to support the city council and policy. But I haven't read anything that states what the policy is for the city council. And if this, because I'm working off of what's considered a proposal. This says propose, this is not written
So
as
city
policy.
council adopted that policy as its.
They adopted this
they
as a
adopted-
policy?
They adopted the
The
sidewalk plan.
document, which
As a
is.
policy.
Yeah.
Right, so the
How
proposal.
confusing it is, yeah.
2005, okay.
So the proposed, the proposals, the proposed, I believe they're the one, are identified as major gaps. By adoption, the adoption of this plan
Okay.
indicates that became their stated policy on sidewalks. And so the listings you see in here, the goals, the objectives listed in here is what informs staff as we design projects, along with the 2005 transportation plan, along with a number of other policy documents that the city council has adopted. So they're presented, when it's presented as a proposal, but when there's an affirmative vote to adopt it, it becomes a document, a policy document of the city council.
It's coming up on 20 years, and so I think this is a great conversation and timely, given the circumstances of this particular example.
Yeah.
And I think maybe the word variance is an interesting way of thinking about it, but given it wasn't even a part of this particular
We used to do
document.
case by case, like what Greg said, and we did give exemptions on South Ferry Drive. Proposed sidewalk where just wrecked a guy's driveway because it's too steep. So,
Let's just back up a little bit here.
yeah.
So, first, a little history about why we even have a sidewalk plan. There were no sidewalks on Prospect Street by Prospect Elementary School. It was an existing neighborhood. People in the 50s, 60s, 70s did not put in sidewalks when they built houses in a city. It just wasn't done. For 1910s, 1920s, yes, but there was a period of time when sidewalks were not put in the city. And it was common nationwide. It was considered, people said this is a safety issue. And, right by a school, obviously. So that's when this whole sidewalk plan thing occurred. And I want to tell you a story. Somebody I worked with that lived on Prospect Street said to me, I'm fine if I have to have sidewalks, but then I think everybody else should have to have sidewalks too, as a matter of fairness. And I've lived by that ever since. Now, we have made exceptions. It wasn't just one person's driveway. There was bad. The city engineers look at these things and say, this isn't practical, this is not going to work. That's not the case here. I saw this documentation. I saw this small garage. I saw that small driveway. I thought to myself, that sidewalk cutting right through that little driveway, That's a burden for this property with this small garage. Now I see there's a large driveway with a 4-car garage. And just at this meeting, I realized that other drive was already planned to come out. So as far as undue burden on a property owner, I don't see that as an issue. Yes, it's a beautiful, unique house, lot, just like there's a whole lot of other beautiful, unique houses and lots in this city. That's not a reason to not have a sidewalk. Those people on Prospect Street had a nice neighborhood without sidewalks. They got sidewalks now. And just as an interconnection for people walking around, I think, this sidewalk doesn't go nowhere. It goes from a sidewalk that ends to another sidewalk that ends or goes across the street. It's not a sidewalk going nowhere we talked about sidewalks on dead-end streets. And we don't put those in, as far as I know. Birch Court, I don't think, has a sidewalk. So, yes, there are exceptions. In my mind, this is not one of them.
Any more comments? All right. So, Misty, can you take the roll call vote on the motion to take out the new sidewalks?
That we recommend to the city council. Yeah, can we read the motion, please?
Oh, Misty, you want to read the motion again?
Why don't I do that, just in case? I feel like I have a handle on it. We discussed it twice. Temperley made a motion, Polachek seconded. The motion was to amend the bid documents to recommend removal of the sidewalks from the plans that extend from the Catholic Church to Lakeshore Drive.
Yep. All right.
Clear?
Okay, yep, clear. Yep. All right, Misty.
Okay, and I just want to mention that Mr. Beagle had to leave. Typically, he would be called in the roll call and he could choose whether or not to vote, but he did have to go to his other meeting, so I will not be calling his name.
Okay.
Ms. Curler?
No.
Mr. Polachek?
Yes.
Ms. Schmager?
No.
Mr. Picard?
No.
Mr. Temperley?
Aye.
Motion fails.
And we have another request to incorporate Susan's presentation.
Well, is this another amendment?
Well, if you want to incorporate a pilot program in the College Street, or we just let the motion die, and the assumption is we won't be doing a pilot program per college.
Yeah, I don't have record of a motion.
No, we have.
Second
That's
motion
what
to
I'm
amend.
saying.
Oh, okay.
We have another request from tonight about redoing the College Street as a pilot program.
Well, let's discuss, because I think there's some different.
What?
Our request was, the only thing for college was to do the framed inlet. which
Oh, okay.
It was part of your, it would be easy to insert, it doesn't change your bid documents much.
I'm sorry, I can't hear whoever's
All right,
speaking.
all right. Well, we get it. So Susan's just requesting we modify the bid to include the frame inlet. That makes sense.
I wonder if we could discuss since we're back to the original motion, discuss the overall plan.
Okay.
Because I think it would be really great to hear from staff about the stormwater management design. I know that's something that, like with West
All right,
Lake
that's
Street
fine.
too, was important. So could we have that?
Yeah, that works. Yeah,
Maybe-
we're back to the original discussion on the project as a whole.
So if we could have staff maybe go over it and highlight the stormwater management?
With the board's permission, I would invite Matt Hoslet, the
Yeah.
project engineer, to speak to specific components of the project.
Good evening. All right, so we're doing, excuse me. I guess where do you want me to start, or what?
I think that you start with the stormwater management.
Stormwater
aspects.
management and how it relates to Susan's presentation.
Sure. So overall stormwater management, we are as you can see in the plans, if you had a chance to review the plans in the documents, we're adding storm sewer in these 2 blocks. Greatly helps the reduction of TSS and phosphate and all that stuff to the lake, which is great. We're also adding a 4-foot diameter saffle baffle, which I actually moved from the end of the Lakeshore Drive up a little ways just because the configuration, manufacturer's configuration wouldn't allow me to put that structure there. So I'd move it about 100 feet east. All of the stormwater structures, the inlets and the manholes will have 2-foot sumps in them as well to help reduce debris and, phosphate and all that stuff to enter into the lake. I guess specifically regarding your inlet bags, inlet grates that you're talking about, I guess that is something that we could do. Ultimately, it's up to the city staff and council board, council and public works board here. We will have temporary inlet bags for construction. That's very common, obviously. You're talking about more long-term, as far as I understand. So, I guess historically we haven't done it, obviously, right? And that's why you're here. But it is something that theoretically, yes, could be done, so.
Matt, if I may, Matt, you have knowledge of the particular ones that Mrs. Trier is recommending?
I would have to look more into it. I'm not a stormwater engineer, so I would have to look more and ask a couple questions internally.
Well, here's my question. Is that something that could be placed in afterwards by city crews?
Correct. Yep, it doesn't have to be bid in this project.
Okay.
That's good to know.
But it could
So it's
very
just like-
easily
It's a
be,
point that's
you just take the grate off and plop that in. and put
So
the
it's a
grate
big
back on.
bag, and when it fills up, they take the bag out and they dump it out in the yard waste site and put a new bag in.
Yeah, it looked like about a 2-foot long, roughly, bag that sits in there. Yep.
Different things, with different filtration, so,
Mm-hmm.
more microwave.
So
I
it's
see this
it's
as
a reasonable
very modest-
request.
Very modest request.
Yeah.
And a pilot.
Presumably, we would.
It's just a question of whether you want to do it, and we could maybe.
I'm sorry, we can't hear.
Yeah, Susan, no one can hear you. Well, okay, so the gist of it is, it's a small pilot. I'm hearing a small mod. I'm not seeing Drake angry or nervous.
I think most can attest that seeing me angry would be a very. I don't know that it's in me to be angry, but it seems as though this is likely. Looking at the costs that were included in the program, in the presentation, we may be able to incorporate it into. It's a few $100s per bag, staff time to install it and then empty it. It's a pretty low impact test to see how it works and how we can incorporate it into our processes. So I think we certainly are capable of doing this.
Because Fremont Street is coming up too, and if that works for college, would you do that for Fremont?
And it doesn't even have to be any particular street at this point, whatever works best for the city.
Yeah.
Staff, if something closer or maybe in front of somebody's house so they can see it more often. I don't know.
Just one that drains into the lake.
Or in any case, I think the discussion would be, depending on how many you have, that staff time of maintaining those on a regular basis would have to be studied in the pilot as well.
All right.
I think it'd be timely getting the pilot going, especially since we are supporting the plan, the sidewalk plan, where we are adding additional concrete. And so we I think it would be really interesting to counterbalance it then with actually doing something as a pilot to kind of look at the stormwater management in a more innovative fashion, given we didn't quite get the other one passed.
The stormwater inlets and the other things mentioned are already improving the stormwater at this location as well. So it's not like the city's not doing anything. That's what he had mentioned. This would just be one additional thing. And evaluation would mostly be how the devices perform and how time consuming it is to maintain them. because we're not going to measure, we're not going to measure how much phosphorus it stops from going into the lake, for example.
Just be bags, how many bags
Oh,
emptied
yeah,
every year, every
yeah.
month, or whatever, yeah. I wanted to just clarify to Matt, the Saffel baffle, that's the same technique that was used on West Lake Street, right?
Correct. It will not be as large as that structure was,
Okay,
just based off of the pipe capacity that will be entering in. My stormwater engineers, we have 18-inch diameter concrete pipe that will be running down College Street. Lake Street, we had 36-inch pipe running down. There's a lot of water that got to Lake versus to College on this project. Plus, that was significantly bigger project as well. So, but yes, same exact manufacturer, same exact product, just on a little bit smaller of a scale.
because that's something we're still evaluating how it's working and all of that. So it's somewhat new to us, but at least it's, like you said, Mark, something that we're trying to do something additional. And then with these, if we do a pilot with these inlet, framed inlet bags, could that be on any inlet? I mean, presumably you'd focus on the ones closest to the lake, you know, downstream, so we're capturing most of that runoff, particularly from the parking lot.
I think depending on what the goal of the program is, I think one thing I learned from our, I believe it was Brandon actually, is that a vast majority of the city does not drain to Rock Lake. And so I think that is misunderstood by several people as well. So if we're looking at lake quality specifically, then there's going to be specific areas that we're going to target to install infrastructure to improve that. But much of the city actually runs off into the rivers, Rock Creek and other places. And so, you know, lake quality is obviously a priority of the city. And so we'll certainly want to prioritize those areas that are running off into the lake to make sure that we are maximizing their benefit to Rock Lake.
Well, keeping the narrower street, that was one of the, you know, that's one thing to reduce impervious surface. I mean, the city does a lot of things like the leaf pickup and stuff like that too that are geared toward water quality.
And I do think it should be noted that there's no stormwater infrastructure on this street right now. So this will be a significant improvement to stormwater management on College Street. And if we do additional installations of these in the inlet, that would be another thing on top of that. But this is brand new stormwater management infrastructure that has not been there before and has previously just gone where water chooses to go. And so this is a great opportunity to improve our stormwater management that affects Rock Lake.
So what do we need to do as far as the framed inlet idea? Does this board want to make a recommendation to add that? I mean, it sounds like it doesn't require a change to the
I'm
plans.
hearing a consensus.
So I
No
think
one's complaining.
the cost is nominal. We can check our existing budget to see if we could incorporate such a program into our existing budget, and then we wouldn't need to seek additional funds from the city council for that. But I think it's been made clear that the quality of Rock Lake and the protection of Rock Lake is a important priority of the city, and so if we can find a way to do even better at that, and this seems to be one that we can do rather easily, I see no reason why we can't test it out and see how it works in our day-to-day maintenance and how it can be incorporated and see how we do.
All right.
This is the first time I've seen one of these rain garden entrances, these curb cuts, which to me looks like a pretty low-cost, simple, easy-to-maintain thing, which I hope the Strand bring that back to the rest of your organization. And
We've actually used it on Jefferson Street last year. The curb cut with the rain garden.
Oh, great.
See, you
Yep.
guys are
There you go.
doing more than we know. Fantastic.
Yeah, we've been implementing more and more green infrastructure, you know, as the years go on, you know, clearly.
I know
all
when
the
I
technology.
started on the board, there was, large developments were done, and it was pipe that water off-site as fast as you can. And I don't know if it's a state law or whatever, just times change. Basically, every large project now has on-site stormwater retention.
I want to make a correction. It was on CP Avenue, not Jefferson Street, but it was within that project.
So, yep. Try to move things forward. Thank you.
As for everything else on this project, did anyone have any red flags or concerns? No? I guess we call a motion to approve the design, the first motion, or is the first motion? Misty? Oh, can you read the
Mr.
first?
Paul?
The
original motion?
The original motion.
I'm sorry, can you repeat what you said? I thought you asked me to call it, so I started calling.
Oh, no, the board members want you to read the original motion.
So there's not a prepared motion. I've got to go back after the meeting.
I can restate it. I made it.
That'd be perfect, Ms. Curler.
Yeah, my motion was to recommend that the city council seek contractor bids on the College Street reconstruction bid package.
Thank you.
And Mary was the one you seconded, as I
Mary
recall.
seconded, yeah.
Yes, that's what I have is Ms. Schmager.
Yeah. So just call a roll call vote on that motion.
Mr. Polachek,
Yes.
Ms. Schmager,
Aye.
Mr. Picard,
Aye.
Mr. Temperley,
Aye.
Ms. Curler.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
All right, agenda item number 8, discussion recommendation of Brookstone Phase and bid package, or Phase 8 bid package. How would we get a motion to approve it in a second to get discussion going?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
You got that motion, Missy, just to approve the recommendation before us?
Yes.
All right. I didn't see any red flags. It's your typical subdivision. Phase 8's been planned for years now, right? All of Brookstone, so.
I just had one quick question about the borrow area. I drove out there earlier, and it looks like there's maybe some deposited fill kind of at the end of the stub. Is that supposed to be the borrow area, or it's just basically the land to the south?
You're referencing the borrow area for the cul-de-sac, correct?
Right.
Like where we're going to get that borrow fill from?
Right.
We actually, Strand spoke with, Mr. Giusti, the property owner. He gave us permission to borrow the fill from Phase 9 to use for this buildup of Phase 8.
Okay, got it.
Yep. So basically, what you see on the plan is allowing the contractor to go out there, grab the fill, and bring it back, and stay in a limited area.
Sounds good.
I don't have any more comments or questions. It's pretty straightforward, new subdivision. So, all right. All right, Misty, can you call the roll call then vote, please?
Ms. Schmager,
Aye.
Mr. Picard,
Aye.
Mr. Temperley,
Aye.
Ms. Curler,
Aye.
Mr. Polachek.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
All right. Future agenda items. Is the yard waste coming up next month? Oh,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Next month.
Yes, we'll have some information on the yard waste and then the maintenance program. And if we've got some updates on wastewater treatment, we'll have those.
Okay, all right, Mary.
Oh, I had a follow-up on green infrastructure, just more of a strategic conversation or discussion around where else that may fall. Because I thought the presentation was very interesting. I think there's relevancy here when one of our core premises and our strategy is quality. And so just I just think understanding where it may fit in and what do we need to inform the city council about regarding our learnings? Because it's not a policy. I'm getting back on, I'm trying to understand the policy, because then my second agenda item is, I'm kind of bothered by the sidewalk plan conversation. I am, that we've spent a lot of time, I'm hearing the words about the policy, the plan was adopted, it's from 2005. It does beg the question, some of the conversations we've had regarding its relevancy with whether it is special properties or not, or variances or not. There are circumstances by which you may not want to fill everything for whatever reason, and does it allow us an opportunity to say, what do we do next, since this was 2005? Is it just worth a conversation with the city council, or?
Mr. Doyle has asked for reconsideration of the bike plan as well.
Yeah, I think this has come up in conversation a couple places as well, but obviously so the comprehensive plan is ongoing through an update right now. It's come up multiple times. I believe that that draft plan is, until it's adopted, is going to include a recommendation that we update these plans that haven't been updated since 2005. I do think they should be looked at again. That's a long time to go.
We're a lot different than we were.
Make note of the preface. The Public Works Board had nothing to do with it. We just wrote a check out to Strand and they took it. I don't recall them being included in any joint discussion.
Mm-hmm. And
the sidewalk plan, right?
Yeah.
And it can certainly start. It can certainly start at this level and have it. You know, any plan that we develop.
It should. All the other communities, their preface is, Strand or along with these board members, because I was on the state DOT pedestrian plan, and there was a huge section. Here are the citizen members of that committee who helped DOT staff, but 2005 bike and pedestrian plans, it just said Strand.
So is it our role, or is it the planning commission's role for some of this? So that's the other thing too, is clarity about how we can support or link.
I've been to the planning commission and they mentioned it and they passed on it. So that's where it's at.
As long as I'm back to the comment about clarity.
It's intermingled. So by statute, the comprehensive plan is clearly within the plan commission's realm. These documents, these more specific documents, the actual documents that inform how to design things, where things go, specifics, don't necessarily have to be, they may be referenced in the comprehensive plan, but there is no statutory authority like there is with the comprehensive plan that the plan commission must do these things. So I think certainly the Public Works Board can make recommendations to the city council to change these policies. I think the Public Works Board can review these policies. I think, there's any number, whether that's a full review of it using a consultant to help, or if this board has ideas themselves of projects they would like added, projects that are no longer a priority, the conversation over filling of minor gaps. Because this document really applies to existing neighborhoods, because neighborhoods that don't exist right now are mandated to have all sorts of things through our subdivision code. And so if we want to change how we handle these existing neighborhoods and how we go about installing sidewalks and what our goals are for a pedestrian network and pedestrian connectivity, I think that is absolutely a conversation that can happen at the Public Works Board, and one I think that staff would invite, because we certainly want to know that we are fulfilling the goals of the policymakers, and that when we're designing these things, that we are bringing something forward that you can all rely on is reflective of current goals and priorities and are not outdated. So I think we can go at it a number of different ways. If we want to have a consultant look at it again, look at what we've accomplished in the current plan, what exists out there that we still want to achieve, or we can have a broader conversation. We can start with a broader conversation by this board of how do you want to handle gaps that exist, or really any sidewalk policy in the existing established neighborhoods. Because I know, it doesn't come up, but the city council could adopt a policy of anything related to sidewalks. You can, during a street reconstruction, you could remove sidewalks. I mean, it's not, staff driven. We want the vision of the city council accomplished. And so if we want to start with that broader conversation of how to handle sidewalks in existing neighborhoods, that can certainly be an agenda item. And maybe that progresses to a full review of the sidewalk plan. We certainly don't have to wait for the comprehensive plan to be complete. This process can be parallel or be done prior, and if it's adopted, it's the policy of the city council. So
Well, they can modify the comprehensive plan afterwards.
Absolutely.
Get that out of the way, then they can just modify it with the new updated sidewalk and bicycle plan.
And in certain cases, you have to update your comprehensive plan. That's more for land uses and development and things of that nature.
You do that all the time already, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah, when it comes up, if something wants to be approved that conflicts with a designated land use, you update the
In
comprehensive
that case,
plan.
you could just strike out 2005 plan and put
Put it amended.
2023. It's a Word document, it's pretty much.
So it's been stated, none of these are written in stone and that they can't be changed, but once adopted, they inform staff. And so that is an important thing to remember, is we can't bring every detail, and every decision point before, our councils and boards. And so to be as efficient as possible, we try to design to the standards that we think there are. And if that's not the case, we want to remedy that.
So just regarding sidewalks, I recall at the city council level, well, we used to do this, the Public Works Board used to suggest or put a plan of yearly sidewalks together. And I think that was on existing areas. And I think the city council changed that to be only during new construction. And I would think that there would be a resolution, city council resolution or something to that effect.
That's still ordinance, that the Public Works Board maintain a list.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about, we used to say, we got 1,000-foot budget or a 5,000-foot budget, let's figure out where to go based upon city staff recommendations, and then that would go up to city council. But at some point, the city council said, we're not going to do this anymore. We're only going to do it on new construction or rebuilds.
Rebuilds.
Yeah.
Rebuilds. So I'm just telling you that in case maybe there's a resolution that you're not aware of.
Yep.
There is a standalone maintenance budget.
Yeah,
for
Dwayne
sidewalks,
submits a
so I'm
spreadsheet
a little
every
bit
year.
confused about
I think what he's bringing up is that, so there's the maintenance plan, which is the maintenance of existing, but that perhaps in years ago, the Public Works Board would consider where to install sidewalks as a standalone project. And then at some point it transitioned to, we're going to tackle these gaps when the road reconstruction.
No, that was in
project
our
comes
original
up.
2000 plan, Mark. We had all the streets in red.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
The Public Works Board was directing with city council input which sidewalks to put in existing places.
You're right.
And the city council decided to not do that anymore. They would have had to vote to do that. So that's why I'm saying that there is some city council policy.
Yeah, I think we will search. That's good information to know. I think it certainly, when you look back, it certainly has transitioned to the Public Works Board approving the capital improvement plan, which is going to include reconstructions, and then approving the maintenance plan, rather than standalone sidewalk projects. So
yeah.
Oh, you're wondering why the council stopped openly voting on new sidewalks?
I think I explained it pretty
yeah, I think
well.
the question is when there was a transition point, it sounds like at some point where the Public Works, the city council said, we no longer want to do standalone sidewalk projects.
Because it ended up hour-long meetings like tonight. I know for a fact, it drove the city manager crazy and it drove the council members crazy that every time they voted on new sidewalks, The room is
So
full.
my question from a policy standpoint there is, do you want to discuss that, Mark? And do you think that that's a better alternative? Do you want to revert back to that system? Is that kind of what you're getting at here?
No, I'm wanted to tell city staff that there's probably some, I don't know for sure, but I think there's some city council level policy that was set in the past. I wanted to make
To that effect. I understand you now.
And then how the board and the staff and city council want to move forward, I'm not making any specific statement about that.
I got you. Thank you.
Just this whole TAP grant and Highway V and stuff, correct me if I'm wrong, but I was kind of, sometimes I just kind of poke people to get something to happen. And so I said in the past, when are we going to do Highway V? When are we going to do Highway V? Because that's something, it's not going to be construction driven. And I think that prompted the city manager at that time to investigate that TAP grant and put that into place.
Absolutely. There have been some issues with Highway V. It has been identified for a long time as a major gap in the sidewalk network. And the TAP grant itself at 80/20 federally funded was seen as that opportunity. So I know you're familiar with this, but that is a major part of the TAP grant sidewalk project that will occur.
It's quite impressive how much sidewalk we put in between 2005 and now in existing areas.
And that's another reason to revisit the policy, because there's just been a lot accomplished in that vein.
Yeah, just kind of revisit it, look at what's been done and what needs to be done.
There's a couple things that have my memory over the last, I want to say how many years. But you mentioned it earlier, Prospect Street in the school. And if I recall, I don't know the exact date, but there was an accident that occurred prior to that push by that formal council in the 90s. I don't have the exact date, but that was the push to start some of the infill around the schools. All of the infill during those years was special assessed. Special assessments draw crowds like we had this evening because the sidewalk is being paid for by the resident who is fronting the property. Many of those projects throughout the years, as you mentioned, were in the council budget as a standalone in addition to the maintenance plan budget. And I think you're right. Over time, the combination of a lot of work got done, a lot of those infills around the schools, that infill sidewalk happened. And so there were less and less projects. And then I recall at least two that became circumstances where it was difficult because of grades, other infrastructure that was already in our right-of-way or in the city right-of-way, that boards then at that time, and we can confirm that, decided not to pursue some of those projects. One, for example, the east side of South Ferry Drive, near the lift station.
There's 3 trees right there.
Also along the fish hatchery, we decided not to put sidewalks on both sides of that street.
In West Prospect because of a garage.
And I think it transitioned at that point where I think the project then went to maintenance. And the project you were talking about dropped out of the budget. I agree, I don't know exactly what year, but we can look.
Are you talking about Prospect? For Prospect.
I was at 95.
Did I say Prospect?
You said Ferry.
Oh,
South Ferry.
Yeah, you said South Ferry.
That was early 2000s.
And the lift station, there's a lift station that is right in the right-of-way.
No, the engineer at that time said that would be simple manhole cover. We bypassed that because a guy showed up. He had a steep driveway. He said, he put a sidewalk across my driveway. Then I think John Tremaine, public director, said, yeah, you're going to bottom your car out, aren't you? So based on the public director's comment at that time, it's like, yeah.
Yeah, and I think there are times where Jefferson Street, it was referenced in my memo, I asked Strand as to why sidewalk was included on one, and its proximity to a wetland. So there are certainly engineering reasons not to install a sidewalk. But I think I just want to reiterate, my goal is, actually I don't question the comment at all, but my goal actually is to avoid any semblance that the implementation of or installation of sidewalks or any project is being entirely staff driven or is only the goal of city staff, and that I very much respect the policymaking role of the city council and its boards and commissions, and that I want to be sure that we are achieving that vision, and that's the goal we're striving towards, and that if there is ever a point where an adopted policy or an ordinance or anything is no longer achieving that goal, that is simply information that, you know, I need so that I can direct city resources as necessary to achieve the goals that have been stated. I don't want it to devolve into, that this is staff only. It's obviously a partnership between administration and policymakers, and that we want to reflect ultimately the city council's will, but the recommending body's role as well in that. And so that's just to reiterate my comments of clarity and what the goals are, that if we're clear on that, then we can be efficient and effective in our implementation and carrying out of those goals, and that's when we're going to be most effective.
Yeah, no, I agree. I served with 3 city managers. I know when they're hinting, he's hinting we should rediscuss this. I get the hint. I've been open to rediscussing all this for a whole year now, so. All right, any other future agenda items? All right, meeting adjourned.